Before Jersey Mike's was a billion-dollar business, it was a simple shop in New Jersey just called Mike's. And the story of how a 17-year-old boy with no job took this tiny shop and built an empire that now includes more than 1,400 locations is absolutely amazing. Peter Cancro was born on May 15, 1954 in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. His early years were that of a typical American teenager in the 60s, and while his family wasn't wealthy, he lived a comfortable life. But his father felt that it was crucial for a young man to have a solid work ethic, and when Pete was only 14, his father decided it was time for him to get a job. Luckily for Pete, his brother already had a job at a local eatery called Mike's Submarines, and he was offered an interview immediately. Famously, when his father dropped him off, he said, "Don't come home until you have a job." And fortunately for Pete, he could go home with his head raised high just an hour later, as he had gotten the job at Mike's. Mike's Submarines had been open since 1956 and was beloved within the Point Pleasant community. The shop specialized in Italian-style subs with freshly baked breads, deli meats and cheeses, and a red wine sauce. The subs were a huge hit. Even though the style wasn't well known at the time, everyone in Point Pleasant would wait in lines for a delicious Mike's Submarine. By the time Pete started working there in 1968, 3 separate owners had been in and out of Mike's. It's important to note that each of these 3 owners did well in the business. In fact, by the time the Merlot brothers were in charge, they were selling almost 1,000 subs every day. 3 years later, when Pete was a senior, he was still working at Mike's part-time and was doing exceptionally well in his life. He was the president of his graduating class, a football star with a scholarship lined up to play in North Carolina, and had high ambitions of going to law school. Plus, he was considered one of the sub shop's best employees. But everything changed for Pete that very year when the Merlot brothers announced they wanted to sell the business and were actively looking for buyers. The story goes that Pete's mother gave him the crazy idea to buy the sub shop from the Merlots. But of course, as Pete was only 17 and still in high school, he didn't put much stock into the idea. Within only a few hours, with the idea mulling in his mind, Pete got excited about it, and the very next day, he went into work and asked them to hold off on finding a buyer for a week so that he could get the money to buy it himself. This idea was incredibly far-fetched, as not only was Pete in high school, but he didn't have any money to actually buy the business. Remember, Mike's was doing well, and in 1971, it was worth a decent amount of money. To be exact, the owners wanted $125,000, which is equal to $1 million in today's currency. But Pete, now obsessed with the idea that seemed crazy just the day before, was determined. And so he started knocking on his neighbors' doors asking for donations so that he could make enough money to purchase the business himself. Everyone in Pete's life thought he may have lost his marbles, especially when he did get an offer for the full investment and turned it down because the investor wanted to be 50-50 partners and Pete wanted to own Mike's outright. Pete then had another idea. His football coach was also a banker, and he decided to show up unannounced at his house that Sunday night, ready to ask for a loan to buy Mike's. He told his coach, Rob Smith, that he had missed school all week as he was trying to collect enough money to buy Mike's subs and wanted to know if he could help. Pete, though young, came prepared and laid out all the necessary documents that explained Mike's current finances and growth potential. And while the documents were important, one of the main reasons why Rob Smith decided to loan young Pete the money is simply because he believed in him. He had seen his work ethic on the football field, in his studies, and as a part-time employee throughout his high school career. And he famously said, "I believe he can get the ball across the goal line." So, with $125,000 ready, Pete went back into Mike's and purchased the store from the Merlot brothers. That year, Pete turned down his football scholarship and decided to stay in Point Pleasant, even though all his friends were headed off to college. He knew it was a risk, but something inside told him that running this business was exactly what he should do with his life. For the first year, running the business took everything young Pete had to give. In fact, he almost didn't graduate as he missed so much class time working at the shop. But fortunately, he made it by a hair and graduated from high school. Then the real work began. Pete was at Mike's 7 days a week. improving the business, training employees, and preparing to open more stores. Within just a few years, he already had a second location, and at that time, he decided to change the name from Mike's to Jersey Mike's. He had big plans to open locations around the country and wanted everyone to remember where this soon-to-be empire had come from. One of the reasons why Jersey Mike's was so immediately successful was, of course, because of the delicious quality sandwiches they offered, but also because Point Pleasant was such a huge tourist hotspot. Not only were locals buying Jersey Mike's subs all year round, but the thousands of tourists who would come in the summer couldn't get enough. They often purchased a sub or two before leaving the beach to enjoy on the way home. And when doing so, almost everyone would ask Pete when he was going to expand and open a location nearer to their homes. With the encouragement of his loyal customers and the drive to push the business forward, Pete decided to franchise Jersey Mike's in 1987. And what a great idea that was! Jersey Mike's expanded extremely rapidly, and within only 3 years, there were more than 30 locations along the East Coast. But as with many businesses, this rapid expansion was risky, and in 1991, something happened that made Pete think he was going to lose it all. A recession hit the USA that year, and the banking environment plummeted. And because business had grown far too quickly, Pete needed money when there was none to loan. He claims that it was the scariest moment in his life, and he truly believed Jersey Mike's was going to have to close its dozens of doors. Pete did absolutely everything he could to save the business. He let go several executives, sold his belongings, and was paying each bill at the last possible moment before it went to collections. During this time, Pete gave the business 110%. He would personally visit each and every location, doing what he could to help keep the owners on track. And this even included menial tasks, such as cleaning the grill and making sandwiches himself. Pete also took a new approach to marketing and sent out flyers to local addresses, and paid what little money he had to radio advertisements to help get people in the door. It was 3 long years of struggle and stress before Jersey Mike's was back on its feet, but it finally did. Pete was able to hire back everyone he had let go in 1991 by 1994, and only 4 years later, the company grew from 35 stores to 100. Many say that although Pete worked as hard as humanly possible, it was the hiring of Sarah Palisi in 1995 that made the business explode that decade. She had marketing strategy skills that Pete simply didn't have, and as a Point Pleasant native, Sarah was not only a brilliant mind, but also part of the Jersey Mike's family. In 1999, Pete took out a $10 million loan to help expand even further, and although it was another risk, it certainly paid off. Pete's mindset hasn't changed over the past 50 years. He believes, as he always has, that you don't have to be a hero to be successful. You just have to show up every single day. And because Pete wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, and because he worked with intuition and dedication, Jersey Mike's is now one of the most successful chains in the country. By 2020, they had 1,600 locations in 46 states and had their first year with over $1 billion in sales. But the now billion-dollar company never forgot where it came from: the neighbors and people of America. In fact, every last Wednesday of the month, Jersey Mike's still donates 100% of their sales to local charities. At the end of that day, every month, between $5 and $7 million is donated. And Pete claims they are just getting started. He has a goal of making a whopping $3 billion in annual sales and wants to have more than 3,000 stores in the near future. Pete has said that of his many franchise owners, almost 70% have a new store on the horizon. It's said that Pete follows his gut when it comes to hiring franchise owners, and it seems that his gut knows a thing or two. And even though Pete is now worth an incredible $40 million, he still shows up to his thousands of stores and gets his hands dirty on a regular basis. It's safe to say that Pete's high school football coach who invested in him got his money back, and more than that, he can know that he helped a young 17-year-old boy with a dream create a billion-dollar company that has provided the American people with almost 50 years of delicious sub sandwiches. Jersey Mike's is the American dream. It shows that if you work hard and give something all that you've got, you can really make it. Hungry for another fascinating business story? Click on the following video to hear the crazy story about the sheep herder who created Marriott from a black deer stand.